Welcome back. In this video, we are going to create the user interface for our application. So let's go ahead and start with that. Therefore, I'm going to create an empty activity, and I hope you try to build that user interface all by yourself. Of course, it wasn't easy, but maybe you made it. And if you did, then congratulations. Otherwise, no worries. We're going to build it in this video. So I'm going to call this one my calculator, and I will use the package name, tutorials, and then here the save location, you can change that, Kotlin and minimum SDK API 21. So then let's go ahead and build that. So once the Gradle is ready, and we can start with the activity main XML where all the action is going to happen, we can go ahead and get started. So the first thing that I want to change is that I don't want to use a constraint layout, but instead a linear layout. Okay, so we're going to use a linear layout, even though the constraint layout is what Google prefers. In a sense, they are really motivating developers to use it. But in some cases, the linear layout is just super helpful. And the goal of this video is, on one hand, for you to build this layout that we want to achieve. That is this one here, maybe even with different colors, but that doesn't matter too much. And on the other hand, I need to teach you weights, so how the weighting works in depth. We have used weights before, but we're also going to use nested weights. And nested weights is something where the IDE, so our Android Studio, is even going to tell us that it's going to be performance consuming. And we're going to check that out, and I'm going to really go into depth what that means and why we can still use it, and a little bit also about the opinionation of programming, because everyone has an opinion on how to develop something, and in the end, if it works and if it's performant enough for what you want to do, then it's good, right? And it really depends, of course, on the size of the project, because if it's a bigger project, you will need to follow certain schemas and structures and patterns that will make it easier for you to work on this with a team and not just on your own. But as this is just a calculator app and is super simple, we can really keep it simple here. And inside of this linear layout, we will need a text view. Okay, we just had that, but let's just create it from scratch. So the width should match its parent, and the height is something that I'm going to define manually. So I'm just going to say it should be 250 density pixels. Okay, so this will be the text view. Currently, you can just see it here, how large it's going to be. You can see it better on the right hand screen, which is why the designer has to, where you can really see the different items in more depth, even if they have the same color, right? So here you can see that there is something at the top which is not there at the bottom. Okay, so that's our text view, and I want this text view to have a grayer color. So you can see it has not a white background, but it has a gray background. And in order to achieve that, I'm just going to give this a background of here EF. And this is just going to be this grayish color. If you look at this designer now, you can now see that there is a difference between this white and this light gray color. So it's a super light gray, and you can of course go ahead and create a new color inside of your colors XML here. You could go ahead and say color name light gray, for example, like this, or light underscore gray, however you want to call it, and then use the values that I just set, EF. Okay, so this would be the light gray, and then of course you can go ahead and use this color here. So add colors, and then you could also just use light gray, and the IDE will be smart enough to tell you what that is. Okay, so that would be the other way of doing it. Now, I'm going to set a little bit of padding for it as well, so that the text that is inside of it has a little distance to the border. Let's use a big text size here and see how that's going to look like. So here, I'm going to use 48 for the text size. And as a text property, I'm just going to enter a value here just to see how this is going to look like. And you can see there is a bit of padding here towards the top and the left hand side, which makes sure that the text is really well distant to the borders. All right, and now I would like to make sure that the text is going to be not at the top left side, but at the bottom right side. And therefore I'm going to use gravity. Okay, so here inside of the text view itself, I want the text to appear at the bottom right. So you can just go with right and then pipe and bottom. So what that will achieve is it gives us this right here. So by the way, if you just do one of them, so right, for example, we'll just put it on the right hand side. And then if you add the pipe and bottom, now you have two settings at once, and it will put it on the bottom right hand side. Now right is replaceable with end. Then you also get rid of this warning, because right does work, but at the same time the IDE says use end instead of right. All right, then let's just do it. Okay, so right is more, I'd say, humanly readable, but end is fine as in terms of what the IDE wants from us. And then you can also see that the text is also highlighted, and that is because you should not hard code here. At least that's what they're recommending. You should put strings into a separate file, which is the strings XML. So here you could go ahead and create a string, for example, calc text, for example, here, and the actual content of the text would be this number. Okay, so just a number from 1 to 9 and then 0. So we could now, of course, use that here instead. So here we called it calc text. So you could just enter it here and you see you get rid of the warning. So this is how you do it properly, but I'm going to sometimes just hard code it because it's just easier to get the results, and now you know how to do it correctly. But we're going to not do it this way all the time because it just eats up a lot of your time watching this video, and it would bore you to death probably if I would go ahead and create these strings manually each time that I would just want to hard code it. And if we use a bunch of strings, then we're just going to paste them in here real quick, the 5 or 10 strings or whatever that we're going to use, and then we're going to be good. Okay, and now let's go ahead and display the actual buttons. Okay, so what I want to have are, of course, these buttons here next to each other. So how do I achieve that? Well, first of all, we are in a linear layout already, and the cool thing is we can create another linear layout here. So I can just say that the new linear layout should match its parent and wrap its content in terms of width and height. So match parent in terms of width and wrap content in terms of height. What that just means, it will just be as high as it needs to be, and it will be as wide as there is space for it in its parent. And the parent is the parent linear layout, which takes the entire width. So now if you have multiple linear layouts, you need to define which direction they will go to. So the orientation. So here I'm going to say the orientation is going to be vertical, which will now make sure that items will be on top of each other. And this linear layout here needs to be horizontal. So here the orientation will be horizontal, which means the items inside of this linear layout are going to be next to each other. All right, so let's add a button in here, and I'm just gonna create a button with an ID and the width. So the width will be 0 density pixels, and that doesn't mean that it will not have any width, but we are going to see how that works in a minute. And then the height will match its parent. So it will take the height that is available for that linear layout parent, which is pretty cool because it wraps its content, so we don't have to bother about that. And then what I'm going to use here is going to be the layout weight. So here layout underscore weight, which I'm going to set to 1. And by doing so, now my button will currently take the entire available width. So that's the layout weight, what it does. And because the button doesn't have any text, it's just going to, well, not be very tall, but this is the predefined height of a button. We just said match parent, and the parent doesn't even have a height. It just says it should wrap content. So what is it then? Well, the content of the button, the height of the button is predefined as being as minimum this height by default. So now if we add a text in here, let's say this button will be the 7. Now you can see it is pretty much the same size. We could change the text size of the button and so forth, but let's keep it like this for now. Now every button needs an ID, so I'm going to add an ID here. This one will be button 7. Okay, so because, well, it is a button, BTN, and it has the number 7 on it. So now we can just go ahead and duplicate this button. And now you will see that all the buttons have the same width. So all of them are taking a third of the available space because all of them have a weight of 1, and 1 out of the total weight of 3 is going to be a third, so it just takes a third of the available space. So here, this one will be button 8, and this one will be button 9, like so. Now, of course, accordingly, I want to change the text that will be displayed in them. Now you see that on one hand, it's already looking different to what we have here. Here we had, first of all, it's a lot higher. At the same time, it's a lot grayer. So the color is gray. So we're going to see how to change the color in a bit as well. And we also need this divide button. So this one here. And I'm going to call this one button divide. So divide, like so. Okay, so now if we look at it, here we have our beautiful little buttons, but they're super close together. And here they had at least a little bit of distance. Well, the thing is, this was initially developed in an older Android Studio version where by default the buttons would have a little bit of margin surrounding them. So now let's just go ahead and add a margin towards all directions of just 2 density pixels for each of the items. Okay, so let me copy this and each of the buttons to be more precise. And let me just put it inside of here. The order doesn't really matter too much, but it's good if you keep the order the same. So now you can see that the buttons have at least a little bit of distance to each other and they're not glued to each other, which is really useful. Okay, so now that we have a bunch of buttons, I would like to implement a functionality for the buttons. So once we click on them, I want to do something. So let me add the onClick property. You can see here it's crossed out, and I will tell you why it's still fine to use it and why it's not fine to use it. Okay, so it's still fine in terms of it's still going to work, but it's not fine in terms of they are not very happy with using the onClick method because it makes your code very difficult to maintain. But because we are working with an application that is super simple and we know exactly what we're doing and we have full control over it, we can do it. But as it is, if somebody else were then to look at your code, it would be a lot more difficult for them to understand what's up because this is not common practice anymore to use the onClick method. But now imagine we have these 13 buttons, and imagine we had to define an onClick listener for every single one of those buttons. That would go too far, right? But that's what we would have to do. And we would have to do that in our main activity, and this would make the main activity super large. But still, let's go ahead and just set it up. This method that I want to run once we click on the button. So therefore, I'm going to create a little method called funOnDigit, and it will require a view. So basically what clicked on it, the view will be the button itself that clicked on it. We need to import the Android view library, and then for now we can just go ahead and display a little text saying button clicked or button click worked. Therefore I'm going to use a toast.makeText, and here the context will be this and button clicked, and the length will be long, so toast.lengthLong, as well as we need to show this thing. So now let's use this onDigit method or function that we created and put it in here. So once we click on the 7, it will execute our onDigit. Let's run this real quick. Okay, so there we are. Let's click on the 7 and you see button clicked worked. So I'm going to use this onDigit because it will make our coding a lot smoother and simpler. But if you are working with a bigger project, you should not use onClick. Okay, you should use the onClick listener as we have seen in other videos, because that's what Android Studio has decided to not be happy about anymore since Android 12. Before that it was fine, but with the latest Android Studio version, it just says that we should use instead the onClick listeners or data binding. And we're going to do both of those things in later projects. But for this project, it really helps us to use onDigit, because then the only thing we will need to do is we will need to have 2 methods that take care of what should happen once we click on a button, instead of having 13 onClick listeners. Okay, so that's just a different way of simplifying our code. Okay, so now let's use this onClick and add that to our buttons. So all of our buttons should now have this onDigit method assigned to them. So you see that here we are defining which method should be called once we click on this button. So here 7 works, 8 works. Let's wait until it's gone. Okay, now 8 worked. And here you see length long is like 2 seconds or so. So this one worked as well. And then let's click on the last one and you see that works as well. So all 4 buttons now execute this onDigit method each time that we click on it. And that, as I said, is fine, even though Android Studio complains here. And by the way, it could very well be that in a future Android Studio version, Android Studio just decides to not even offer this onClick property at all anymore. Okay, so this has been around since the beginning of Android, and I'm teaching you some little tricks here that you can use. And by the way, in order to get rid of this warning, you can just click on suppress add tools ignore using onClick XML attribute. And if you click on that, you will see that it will then ignore it for this particular line. You have to, however, do it for every single one of them if you want to get rid of those warnings. The same would go for those texts here, because it's not happy for you to putting the string directly there, but you can extract the string directly as well. So the resource name would be _7, the resource value would be 7. So if you click yeah or okay, it will create this new string entry here, which is going to be _7, which will just be the value of 7. And you can now do that for every single one of them, and then it will stop complaining and you will not have any warnings anymore in your user layouts. And here for the dash, well, there it doesn't work. So the resource name has to then be something like divide. And I believe it's a divide like so. Okay. So that's it for this video. In the next one, we're going to finish this user interface, because otherwise the video would be too long. What was important for me is to talk about the different opportunities and ways of doing something. So you cannot always just do it with one way. There are multiple different solutions on how to get things done. So see you in the next video.